Today we're going to talk about change management. We will try to focus on practical approaches, which is basically a bit the core of our initial idea about the project. As you can see here, we are 11 partners in this project co-founded by the European Union. Change project is coordinated by ENGSO. And then today, Nextport is supporting the development of this webinar. And then you can see here all our partners, and also we put for your convenience a nice QR that you can scan, and it will lead you to the Change website, so you can know more about the project, all the latest updates, and also all the things that we did until now, especially the other webinars and all the training tools that we're trying to provide through this project. So very quickly, our general objective, this project comes from a previous one called CHAMP. Through the findings of CHAMP projects, we decided to develop even more the initial idea and to work a bit more on change management, because of course this is something that in the sport field at the moment it's very much needed. And so we would like to equip the sport movement with innovative governance approaches, as you can see in our description here. And especially we are trying to focus on 3 specific areas we would like to give an input to: digitalization, inclusion and engagement, and sustainability. This is our general objective. And then very quickly going through the specific objective, we started by conducting a background research, because of course it's important to build our work on clear and scientific data. So we started with this research that it was supported by the implementation of several workshops we had in the different countries involved in this project. We investigated about innovation readiness, and the results of this first phase of the research you can find on the website, including some summary translated in the different languages of the project. Also, through Change Project, we're trying to build a hub of experts in the 3 areas that I just mentioned. And to do that, we involved and engaged some experts in our network. One of them is today here, is the star of the webinar, and is going to accompany us through change management. And all the others are also supporting all the phases of change project, included the research phase, and also the following one that we will see a bit more by the end of this webinar. Still on data research and collection of new information that then will lead us to our 4th point and specific objective. So the development and implementation of an interactive toolkit that we can offer to the sport movement in order for them to set a mindset related to change, and to support them in implementing a step-by-step change in their realities. And by the end of this project, we hope to have created, besides a hub of experts, also a community that can be supporting the sport movement all around Europe, and not only. So we are aiming to create a network of change advocates. That would be all from my side. Just a quick introduction of the project, which, as I mentioned, you can find on ENGSO website, and all the partners' website as well, with some news that then will lead you to the original project website. So I will leave the floor to my colleague, Andrea Merle from Nextport, and she will introduce us a bit, the speaker of today.
Yeah, so thanks, Alicia. And well, as you have briefly introduced, We are here today to discuss, I would say, the key topic of the change project, which is change management. And we will be exploring this topic with our guest, Antonio Vizcaya, who is also one of the sustainability experts within the expert hub that we have created within this change project. Antonio is joining us from Mexico, so good morning to him. He has an extensive background in sustainability with experience across strategy, consultancy, and teaching. And throughout his career, Antonio has focused on empowering others to tackle sustainable challenges. He has supported several organizations in transitioning to new practices by applying different frameworks related to change management, which is the topic for today. Currently, Antonio is working as a freelance consultant, collaborating with several and different organizations. So thank you very much for joining us today, Antonio. The floor is yours.
No, on the contrary, thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure just like being able to taking part of these type of initiatives, and maybe just kind of like to make something clear about why someone that is a bit more focused on sustainability is talking about like change management. And that's something that I learned after a couple of years doing some work in sustainability. But at the end, we understand or we realize that every single strategy that we proposed, created, and wanted like to implement with every single company or organization needed to kind of like work through a process of change management, because at the end, in one way or another, most organizations weren't ready or prepared to being able to actually implement that strategy that we were actually pushing or presenting to our clients. So we end up kind of like for our work in the implementation phase, being able to accompany those organizations within the change management process for them to being able to kind of like adopt or embrace that strategy that we were presenting to them. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. Please let me know if you are seeing my screen now. Perfect. Let's jump right ahead and kind of like following one of the comments. The idea for this conversation today is to make it as dynamic as we can and just kind of like avoid me talking for an hour and just like boring everyone. So it would be great if everyone just kind of like chip in, participate, just like share your knowledge, your experience, and everything that you want to say about the themes that we are going to discuss. Just feel free to open your mic and talk about your own experience. I think it's going to be important for the kind of like for the whole group, just to learn from one another experience. So during the presentations, the presentation, I'm going to have like a couple of slides with open questions. I'm going to give like 30 seconds, like a minute, just to see if someone wants to say something about this specific question. And if not, we can just like move ahead. So let's jump right ahead. And I wanted just like to start a presentation asking you, why do you think it is so important right now to talk about change management? Why is so important for your organization, for the work that you're doing, and for the success in the long term of the organization that you're working on? I don't know if there's one or like two people that want to say something. If you do, please open your mic and just like share your ideas. If not, you can also use the chat. I'm going to give just like 10 seconds to see if anyone wants to say something. And again, just like feel free to share any experience, idea, anything that you think is relevant. At the end, I think it's always in this type of conversation, just make sure that we learn from one another. But also I know that many of you could be like in a space that it's difficult to share. So no problem. Let's keep going.
May I say something maybe
Yeah,
that
please,
is useful?
No,
Yes.
go ahead.
So I think it's quite fundamental to know the fundamentals, of course, because change. When we talk about change, it can mean like everything actually, and there are so many fields which should take into consideration. So based on that, there might be some confusion on how to proceed, how to step up. And due to the different fields, I think it's very important to have the like theoretical basics of on how it works and what are the points that should be addressed in the different fields.
Thank you. No, I totally agree, and I think that is a great point. When we talk about change, it could be everything, right? And that's exactly right. Again, it happened to me when I started working in sustainability. I wasn't that involved in change management, even though there's like professionals focused exclusively on change management. But at the end, the learning is every single time that you want to do something in an organization that requires a change of direction, and sorry for me to use the same word, but maybe to shift the way that we do things, we need to work in some way or another through a process of change management, because that is going to be to be needed. Karin mentioned that we're in the middle of big change process and uncertainties, which require readiness and capacity to adapt and change, but also to be resilient. Exactly. That is kind of like maybe one of the cornerstones of words of the presentation, resilience, right? Just like for being able to be adaptive and prepared for anything that is coming along the pipeline. Just kind of like to keep the conversation, this is a great concept that it's like mentioned a lot when we talk about change management, and that is that we need to recognize that right now we live in a VUCA world. And what do we say? What do we mean when we say that we live in a VUCA world? Is that there's like a lot of volatility, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's like a lot of complexity and a lot of ambiguity, right? And all of these different things that are happening right now in the world are pushing organizations to be prepared for changes that are coming, right? Because when we talk about volatility, we are saying that there's like rapid and unpredictable changes in all of the industries, markets, and kind of like how technologies are being developed, how consumers are behaving. So that volatility are kind of like pushing organizations kind of like to change from one day to another. Then there's like a lot of uncertainty again, because all of the things that are happening in the world make very difficult for managers, for organizations to being able to predict what is happening. And when you are not able to predict, it's very difficult for you to prepare the structures that are needed to kind of like address those things that are going to happen, right? And because of that, you need to be very quick and very prepared to change without knowing what's going to happen. Then complex, it's right now, and with globalization, with technology, with social media, with internet, with all the things that are happening, we are seeing a world that it's kind of like hyper connected. And because of that, everything that is happening affects many parts of the business and all of the people that take part in the organization. And because of that, we need to kind of like be aware that every single external factor may affect the way that we operate and the things that we do. And then ambiguity, because again, because of all of the things that are happening, because the level of information, because of how interconnected things are, there's not like a lot of clarity on the events and trends that may impact an organization. And again, this is like very connected to the uncertainty part, that kind of like, if we don't know what's going to happen, it's very difficult for us to prepare with time. But we know that eventually something will happen that will push us to change, right? And because of that, we need to understand the processes of change, just being able to be very effective, very fast, just be ready to implement those changes when needed. So kind of like just at the end, all of the things that are happening, if we think kind of like with COVID, I think COVID is a great example. Me kind of like in the industry of sustainability, after COVID, we see 85% of the companies kind of like reassessing or rethinking their role in the world. And because of that, they start investing more in sustainability. And that happened because kind of like when many industries and organizations were pushed to close during COVID, they kind of like their role within the society wasn't clear anymore. So they needed like from one day to another to rethink their role and then start investing and change in a couple of months, right? So I think COVID is a great example of those events and those like things that can happen that may push organizations all over the world to change without any further notice, right? So we need to be prepared. And again, I think this statement is very clear. Any organization that wants to thrive in the long term needs to be very skilled at transformation. We need to be very, very quick, be ready, and just be willing to transform our organizations for all of the things that are happening. But if we want to transform any organization, we need to be very good at change management processes. A very just kind of like a quick concept of what we kind of like think when we say about what is change management. And at an organizational level, change management is like a structured and continuous approach that helps organizations and individuals to transition from their current state to a more desirable state, right? So again, it's just kind of like we are in a state right now that we need to change because many things, and we envision this new kind of like new moment or new kind of like position for the organization or for individuals. And that change management process, it's going to help us to transition from one state to the other in a very structured way, right? And some of the things that we need to consider is that change is always pushed by both internal and external factors. External could be economic environment, market dynamics, technological advancements, sustainability issues, regulatory changes. So there are like many things happening external to the organization that may push us to implement or to change the way that we do things. And then there are like some internal things that maybe we are kind of like rethinking our strategy in terms of growth, in terms of consumers. Maybe there's like a change in leadership within the organization. Maybe we find some operational inefficiencies. So we kind of like understand that something within the organization, it's not working as it should. And because of that, we decided that something needs to change, right? And because of that, we started or we kick off with this change process. Again, if we talk about organizational change management, we usually see two types of change, right? Adaptive change, that it's like much more small and gradual, and it's kind of like a react or a response to something that has happened. And because of that, we need to make changes in some of the things that we do, kind of like in how we build the process or some of the processes or workflows that we have within the organization. But again, this is much more small and is for us to being able to adapt to a new reality of the business and then or the organization. And then we kind of like see transformational changes, which is kind of like how organizations actually reinvent themselves. And it's like almost an entirely new organization with just kind of like same people, but they do entirely different things. And this is kind of like, it represents a large scale and often like an entirely change of the dynamic and the way the business or the organization behaves. If we think maybe in one kind of like big case of organizational change, and again, I'm just put like a disclaimer quick right now, you're going to see and hear a lot of things that are going beyond the sport industry. But because when we talk about change management, I think this applies to all industry and sectors, and most of the process that we need to follow, it's exactly the same for all industries, organizations, companies, businesses, sectors. It is going to be the same process. At the end, depending on the industry or the things that we do, that process may be a bit more complex or difficult to implement because we may encounter a bit more barriers or resistance. But at the end, the process that we are going to follow and the things that we may need to do are going to be the same, right? So if we research how some companies change or how some businesses or organizations change in other industries, those learnings and those insights are going to be very valuable to us, no matter the industry or the organization that we are leading or managing. So this is an example that I really like, and it's an energy company in Denmark. So a couple of years ago, and I think it was like 2005, I believe, Dong Energy, which was the biggest oil and gas company in Denmark, it was like a huge pollutant. It was kind of like almost destroying the entire country. They decided, because of a financial crisis that they kind of like they encounter because of the prices of oil and gas, they understand that the future was on renewable energy. So when they changed the CEO, I think the CEO from Lego joined Dong Energy, and they decided to entirely change the company. So in a couple of years, I think it was just like in 10 years, they changed from being one of the biggest and more destructive oil and gas companies to be one of the most sustainable and renewable energy focused companies in the world, which is named Ørsted. So they changed the company entirely. So I just like encourage you to read a little bit more about this case. It is great what they did in just like a couple of years. Another like a bit more smaller but important cases of companies implementing effectively change management. We saw that with Netflix a couple of years ago. I think it was like in 2012. They kind of like they decided that they just didn't want to just like share digital content. And what I say about share digital content, so like take a series produced by another company and put it in their platform and just like share that content. So they wanted to create their own content and become like Oscar winners, Emmy winners, and just being a leading company on creating content. And in a couple of years, like from 2012 to today, Netflix has become one of the leading companies in the world creating content. So now they own a platform that share content created by others, and they also are very strong creating their own content, and kind of like they use their platform to share the work that they are doing. So that is a really nice example. Then also another example of Starbucks, and this is something that happened, I think it was in 2015. Starbucks was encountering a lot of financial problems, mainly because, and in the words of the CEO and founder of Starbucks, they lose kind of like they North Star, and they were focusing exclusively on short-term financial return. But Starbucks kind of like wasn't what we know today of Starbucks, a place that is like very effective and build like a lot of relationships with customers and with the kind of like the people that go to their coffee shops. But they understand that something was happening in Starbucks. So the CEO created this kind of like this letter that he shared to the entire company, and he kind of like retrained all of their employees, all of their managers, all of the directors to this kind of like new vision that he had from Starbucks. And in a couple of years, they changed entirely how the company operates and kind of like start growing a lot, start like earning like a lot of money. But this is like another great example of effective change management, that it's a bit less transformational than the one that we mentioned from the energy company, but it's very interesting how they change the entire way the company and the employees behave with their customers in a couple of years. I'm going to pause really quick just to see if there's like any questions, concerns, comments about the definition. What is change management? Maybe a question about those case studies, just to see if there's like any doubt of concern. And if not, also just like to put like this question to the group, asking what do you think are the key organizational benefits when we talk about effectively implementing change management, and how actually change management can support the long-term success of the organization. I'll give you a minute if you want to type like a question in the chat about the slides that we discussed before. And also if you have like an idea to respond this question, feel free to go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Okay, I think it's all clear, hopefully. Okay. Yeah, good planning. That's spot on. I'm going to move to the next slides. And again, if you have like any questions, comments, or whatever, just like feel free to open your mic or to share something in the chat. But after kind of like many studies, and we have seen that effective change management, when we do effective change management in the organization, and we do this in a structured way and following the right path, we're going to see improved communication, enhanced productivity, reduced level of stress. We are going to be able to improve morale. We are going to enhance the creativity and productivity within the team and colleagues, and we are going to improve our processes of design of decision making. So there are like many kind of like internal benefits that we are going to see if we effectively implement change management. And those changes, those benefits, sorry, are kind of like far beyond kind of like the benefit that we are going to get because we achieve that desired status that we kind of like think when we started the process, but it's more on the things that we are going to see internally because we follow a right approach and a right process. Just like, as an example of this, when we talk about culture, and this, I think this is a stat that it's very important because we usually say that there's like a lot of resistance internally when we talk about change management, and that somehow maybe employees or like internal stakeholders within the organization may struggle to support change management process, which is actually a thing, and we are going to see that in a couple of slides. But it's also important to know that if we implement the right process and we follow the right steps and we eventually do kind of like what I want to say, like an effective change management work, and if we achieve that kind of like that objectives beyond the status that we are going to achieve, we are going to see that kind of like the emotions of the workers within the company are going to increase in the positive side because of the transformation that we achieve, right? So it's also kind of like a great thing in terms of culture if we do an effective work in terms of change management. Now for the fun part, we are going to kind of like talk really quick about 8 kind of like very key and general processes that we need to follow when we think about change management. So first and foremost, before talking about the processes, one of the most important thing that you need to have in mind is that people drive change, right? It is not possible for us to implement or to work effectively in change management without being serious about putting people at the center of this process. And what this actually means is just being able to have like open communication, get feedback, get input, and work collaboratively with all the stakeholders within the organization for us to being able to deliver that change. So again, the key statement here in every single process that we are going to follow along kind of like change management is to have it super clear that people drive change. Then very general, when we talk about change management, this is something that it's known as the change arc. And you are going to see that this is kind of like the process that we usually, or kind of like the journey that we usually see within change management. First, kind of like when we propose the change, and we are going to see like a lot of challenge and a lot of questions about why we need to change, why us, and what actually those change that we want to achieve look like. And this is kind of like the resistance part, right? Then we are going to encourage that kind of like upskill journey that we need to convince, we need to change the way that we think, which is kind of like this mindset shift. And in this part, there's like organization that are facing a lot of barriers, and it's very difficult for them to change mindset because of the way that they are structured, because of the way that they work. But there may be an organization that has like a bit more like flexible and a bit more dynamic culture, so changing mindset is not that difficult. And then kind of like we are going to see new behaviors being implemented because of that change in mindset, and that is when we are going to see, or we are going to be able to say that change occurs, right? When we are actually able to change the behavior and the kind of like the daily conduct and habits of people within the organization. So this is what it's known as a change arc. And now, sorry, I know that this is like a very busy slide, but this is an 8-step process that we can follow for us to do change management. I really like this process and I really like this slide. This was developed by Digital Leadership, which is an organization that develops like a lot of frameworks and educational tools and try to present kind of like different information and processes and diagrams in a way that it's kind of like very dynamic and concrete. But I really like how they structure this process. And just for you, even though we are thinking about 8 steps, we can divide those 8 steps in kind of like 4 key different pillars, which is first create the need of change, and we are going to talk a bit more detail about that. So it's create a need of change, change the direction, change the behavior, and then kind of like change sustainability, right? Which is kind of like how we're going to be able to actually set that change to be effective in the long term. So this is kind of like the process in a nutshell. If we go to the first process of this 8th step, is we need to identify the reasons for change and create some urgency, right? And I think this is kind of like maybe relevant for every single thing that we do, but we need to be very clear what we need to do, why we want to do the thing that we want to do, right? We need to understand that people do not have the same information as we do. So we need to be very clear on why is that we need to achieve. And for that, we need to create awareness. So highlight why we want to do that. We need to present our rationale. So sometimes it's very important to build like a business case, something that I do a lot when we're talking about sustainability. If I go to an organization and I say, okay, you need to invest this amount of money to being able to enhance the performance of your company in terms of sustainability, I'm going to see like a lot of resistance, because the first thing that they do is they kind of like see that investment as a cost, right? So I need to present a business case in the long term about how that investment is going to support the organizational objectives of the company in the long term. If I'm talking to the HR people, I need to present a business case about how that investment is going to improve the way they attract or retain key talent. If I'm talking to the chief of operations, I need to explain to them how invest in sustainability is going to enhance the efficiency of the organization. If I'm talking to the marketing or the sales department, I need to explain how investing in sustainability is going to increase sales or increase customer loyalty or brand awareness or stuff like that. So I think kind of like the learning here is we need to kind of like share information about why we need is important to kind of like follow that path of change, and then build a business case, how we are going to convince people to actually work with us to implement those changes. Then we need to being able to create a team that it's going to be the leading team that it's going to work around the process of change. I think something that has happened before, and I'm going to share that in a couple of slides, but many managers and many people within the organization does not have time enough to work or support with change. So one of the things that it's very important is to identify those key leaders that are going to be the one leading the change, and just kind of like empower that people and that team for them to being able to help people accountable, to push people, and just like to follow all of the things that we need to do within the organization for us to being able to achieve that different process. But again, this is something that we're not going to be able to do on our own. We need to build a team. We need to identify those champions that are going to be able, that are going to support the things that we need to do, and empower that team for us to being able to advance. Again, we need one of the things that we need to being able to develop a vision and a strategy for change. And if you see one of the things that we identified in the change arc is that first, people do not understand why we need to change, right? So that's something that we're going to address with the first steps of like building awareness and building the business case. But also people sometimes is very anxious about not knowing what we want to achieve, and if we achieve that, how the organization would look like if we eventually achieve that change. So it is very important for us to set that kind of like vision and just build like a shared vision and a shared mission within the entire organization for everyone to feel very, very comfortable about the things that we want to achieve, and how they are going to be able to support that new organization or that new vision that we are going to create. So we need to define that vision very, very concretely and very, very easy to understand. And then we need to outline a roadmap, right? How we are going to achieve from being here to being here, right? And that's kind of like, this is going to involve like a lot of steps. But again, the important part here is that we need to be able to build a very compelling vision so people get excited with that thing that we want to achieve. Similar to the steps that we mentioned before, one very, very important thing, and I can stress this enough, is communication. Communication is key when we talk about change management. We need to ensure that everyone understands and support the vision and the strategy and the things that we want to do. And for that to happen, we need to be transparent. We need to use like multiple channels of communication. We need to address any concerns. We need to make sure that kind of like people's voice are being heard, and we respond to any concerns and everything that is happening within the organization. And then we need to lead by example. We need to demonstrate that we are as committed to change as kind of like the things that we are proposing, right? But again, people are not going to understand, and they are not going to support the things that we are presenting to them if we are not communicating very transparently, and if we are not communicating in a two-way street, right? It's not just us presenting the things that we want to do, but us presenting the things, learning from the input and the feedback of people that are going to be affected and people that are going to actually implement those changes. Then we need to, again, empower and remove like any barriers. So we need to identify if there's like any barriers within the organization that may obstacle any of the changes that we want to propose. And that is in terms of like process, in terms of rewards, in terms of how we are assessing performance within the organization. So we need to make sure that any barrier internally that we think we could remove that may kind of like hinder the process that we can do in terms of change management, we need to make sure that we remove that. And then we need to kind of like align those resources and systems towards the change that we want to implement that. And at the end, the idea is that employees are able to be kind of like to act or to ignite in an environment that actually is kind of like rewarded if they support the change that we want to do. One quick thing, one important thing, and this is kind of like almost like relevant to every single thing that we want to do that requires a long-term process, is that again, long-term processes sometimes are very tiring, are very complex, are very stressful. So we need to make sure that we identify quick wins and we celebrate any achievements. We need to build like some momentum within the organization. So if we wait until a couple of years, once we can say that, okay, change has happened, we achieved that we kind of like present a couple of years ago, it's going to be very difficult. So we need to celebrate every single thing that we achieve within the organization, just to make sure that people is energized and the momentum is not lost, right? And this is very important, just kind of like have like that positive reinforcements that build confidence within the team for them to keep supporting and keep working within the activities and the processes that we have presented. We need to build on the change, and for that to happen, we need to solidify the process and again keep the momentum, right? So we need to define ongoing goals, and for that to happen, we need to kind of like reassess the things that we are doing, and then understand how every single KPI, every single objective that we build within the kind of like the process of management need to change. And for that to happen, we need again to, within the entire process that we have defined, we need to reassess and change the different KPIs that we identified, and then we need to align the policies and the procedures internally within the organization to support those ongoing and new KPIs that we have. This is probably one of the most complex steps, but again, we need to make sure that those things that are proposing and those things are doing are actually anchored within the corporate culture. And for that to happen, we need to make sure that people is rewarded, that people are kind of like connected and feel confident about the things that we're doing. So every single thing that we are doing in terms of culture need to be aligned with the things that we are presenting and with this new vision that we have developed in terms of the change that we want to achieve, right? And at the end, we need to understand that if we does not achieve a permanent like cultural shift that supports the change that we are presenting, that change that we can eventually achieve, it's going to be kind of like not destroyed, but maybe disassembled because of we haven't changed the culture and the way that the organization behaves. And we need to understand as culture as those underlying habits and values that every single people within the organization understand, and it's kind of like the guidelines that it's going to dictate the way that people behave within the organization. So I'm going to pause really quick. Those are really briefly the 8 steps of change management, of the process that I propose for you to follow. But again, I know this was like super fast, so just I'm going to pause really quick to see if there's like any questions, concerns, doubts about the process itself. And if not, I can also put another question just to see if there's like any response in the chat, or if someone wants to open their mic. But what do you think are the most important barriers to successful change management? There are many.
I can go ahead, Antonio. Yeah. I think like the main one could be resistance to change. I think you already mentioned. And I think it can be from leadership, but also from some employees. I think maybe especially the ones that have been working in the company for several years, and they have been working and like doing the work in the same way for several years. I think especially for those ones, it's going to be like difficult to change their way of doing things and to change their mindset.
Probably that's a great one. Anyone that has like another barrier in mind? Yeah, I think Erin. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the sport organizations here, and quite a lot of the people working or engaging in sport organizations are voluntary workers, or they're doing in a voluntary way. And do you think that could, well, that could actually stand in the way for some changes? It could drive changes as well, but could you require people who work on a voluntary basis to adopt changes and take on a lot of those new procedures? I think usually that is a barrier, at least if you look at Swedish sport.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I would follow that because of kind of like sometimes how time consuming maybe to follow like a change management process. And for sure, if you are working as a volunteer, you're going to be less excited to put like a bit more time to kind of like understand that barrier. But yeah, totally, that makes sense. And then I'm seeing in the chat lack of coordination, failure to meet deadlines, and insufficient leadership. Well, I can say that all of the things that we have mentioned for sure make sense. This is actually a study released by the UN, sharing kind of like what was kind of like the top challenges when we were talking about change management. But again, the most important is lack of leadership, and this is key because if we want to implement change within the organization, but we do not have the support of leadership, that's not going to happen, right? That's kind of like maybe a barrier that is key for us to address. And then I think something that mentioned the Andrea mentioned, kind of like a resistant culture. We're going to see that resistance from the people within the organization, that they just don't want to change the way that they do things because they have been doing things in a certain way for many years, and no one is going to kind of like change that. So it's very difficult. And then someone mentioned kind of like lack of coordination, which we can say that it's lack of kind of like alignment and lack of awareness. And then we can see kind of like many other different things, right? In terms of what Karen mentioned on the volunteers, we need to be able to put aside like some time for us to kind of like effectively implement the things that we want to do. So again, time is very important, and this is kind of like some of the barriers that we are seeing. So we started like the presentation saying that because of the world that we live today, change is essential for every organization. So every single organization in the world have or will experience change in kind of like in one moment of their life because of the things that we are seeing. So one important thing to understand is that while more change is coming because of the things that we are seeing in the world, people has kind of like hit the hit wall. We are all like very, very exhausted and stressed with change. So it's going to be very difficult because of all of the things that has happened in the last couple of years for us to being able to convince people to keep changing. So we need to be very, very effective in how we present and how we build that rational and business case for us to being able to follow that change management approach. Because again, kind of like the willingness of people to support those changes, it just kind of like has like a collapse in the last couple of years. And we can see that from 43 to 74, that was like a couple of years ago. And that has happened because we have seen like so many changes happening in the world, in kind of like in our personal life and then in the professional side. So people are not kind of like willing enough to commit to support those changes. I think for me, one of the most important learnings is that we need to move beyond this top-down approach. Kind of like how change always, or kind of like is the standard for organizations to follow, is that executives and leaderships, they think about something that needs to change in the organization and they just present that change to the employees, right? And the expectation is that workers and employees and all of the internal stakeholders within the organization just embrace this new path. If we decided like to follow this top-down approach, I can assure you that you are going to find a lot of barriers, from lack of awareness, lack of coordination, lack of support, like a lot of resistance from the people, because again, we just can't expect that we have like a change or something that needs to change in our mind, and then we just are going to implement that. So we need to move beyond that top-down approach and be much more collaborative and build that idea, kind of like co-designed and co-build those ideas with different stakeholders within the organization. Something that is like very, very relevant to what Corinne mentioned is that most managers within the organization do not have enough time to support the work that we are doing in terms of change. So we need to make sure that we set aside some time for people, for them to being able to implement that change. And then with what we were saying about the top-down approach, we need to understand that success increase by up to 32% if we have like an open dialogue with many stakeholders within the organization. So again, something that we mentioned within the 8-step process, but it's just like a quick reminder. You need to make sure that you kind of like have like very, very strong communication channels within the organization. So kind of like it's going to be a success factor for you to being able to implement or to achieve that change. And finally, really quick, just like this is 6 key drivers that EY has identified that can increase transformation success within the organization. And I'm going to just like fly through this because of time, but just consider this when you are kind of like supporting, working, or thinking of implementing a process like this. But the first is we need to lead, right? At the end, it's important that we make sure that we have like the power of leadership, that we have the support, but also at the end that we make sure that we kind of like are supporting or building those leadership skills that allow us to put people at the center. We need to be very inclusive and self-aware of the things that we are doing, and that is going to be key for us to get the support of the people within the organization. We need to inspire, and this is like very similar of something that we mentioned within the process. But if we are not able to build a very, very compelling vision of the things that we want to achieve, and just make sure that employees and people within the organization understand that thing that we want to achieve and why, it's going to be very difficult for us to have that success, right? And if we see I think the third bullet here in the slide, we are going to see that it is key for like most employees to understand why change is essential for them to improve their own transformation outcomes. So kind of like being able to share that information, it's key for most employees. Again, fostering a very kind of like supportive and inclusive culture. We need to understand that change is very stressful and it's going to affect emotionally a lot of people within the organization. So if we do not build a culture and environment that it's inclusive and safe for people to just voice all of their concerns and just kind of like share any of their concerns, or I don't know, like feedback or whatever, it's going to be very difficult for us to get that support and to kind of like achieve a position in which we kind of like have this active listening, that we understand all of the people mindset or thinkings when we talk about the change that we want to implement. Empower, again, this is kind of like very similar to what we discussed before, but we need to make sure that people that are leading and that is supporting the change is empowered enough to push people, to help people accountable, and just to do all of the things that they need to do for us to being able to achieve that change. And for that to happen, it's very important for us to balance a proper structure and a proper governance structure that provide the team with the capabilities and the functions and the things that we need to do for that specific role, but also have the freedom to react and to move the way that they do, right? And also kind of like encourage autonomy for people to being able to take some decisions on their own, knowing that it's going to be very difficult for us to implement that change if we want to have that same hierarchical pyramid of how decisions are being made. If we try to implement that, then it's going to be very slow and it's going to be very stressful process for everyone. We need to use technology, and we need to accelerate progress by upskilling the kind of like the skills of people. Sorry for kind of like repeating the word, but at the end we need to understand that both change and understand the process is something that can be upskill and learn. So investing in technology and as an enabler and investing in kind of like developing skill of people is going to be key for us. And then finally, collaborate. At the end, this is something that we are not going to be able to achieve on our own. We need to make sure that people collaborate and connect with one another and move from a hierarchy, and this is something that we mentioned of moving away from this top-down approach to something that is collaborative and all people within the organization feels engaged and part of the process that we want to achieve, in terms of just something that it's like being ordered and pushed within the organization. And one key thing within the collaborative side, we need to encourage innovation, right? So we need to make sure that people have a space for them to being able to be creative and to change the way that they do things, right? So just kind of like collaboration, co-creation, and innovation. It's going to be a key thing within this. And just to conclude, I think a final line, we need to change the way that we change. I think it's important that every single change need to happen in a very structured and planned approach. So understand if it's very small or transformational, as the thing as we discussed before, it's important that we plan ahead and we put together a proper process that it's going to support the things that we want to achieve. Sorry again if I went like super fast in the last couple of slides, but I just wanted like to set aside some time for questions, for concerns, and for anything that you have in mind. I don't know if someone wants to share, if there's like any questions.
So the floor is open if you want to ask a question to Antonio, which, by the way, we thank so much for the very comprehensive presentation. We do have some time to ask him some question, if it's interesting for anybody. Also, it is possible to send us, so after the webinar, you will receive an email with the email address you can get in contact with if you have further question, or if you would like to know more, or if you would like to get in contact with Antonio or with the project. So there's also this possibility. But if we are okay at the moment, thank you, Antonio. I will take the chance to leave the floor to Karin Book, professor at Malmö University in Sweden, because all of these webinars are meant for us to try to build some capacity, some skills, some knowledge around change management. But in the meantime, there are so many actions in our project that we are carrying on. And one of these, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is the research. We are now in phase 2 of this research, so soon we're going to move with some next steps. And I will leave the floor to Karin, which is in charge of the research at the moment with our partners, to anticipate to us what is going to happen in the next few days.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Antonio, for a very inspiring lecture. Do you have any written material on this?
Not on my own, but I'm happy to share the presentation with kind of like, it was built almost as a guidebook with like very detailed information about how to kind of like work in this. So I'm happy to share the presentation, and we can share that with the group if you think that would be useful.
Thank you. So yes, as Alessia said, I'm responsible for part of the change project. I'm responsible for work package 2, the research package, background research package. And we are, well, as part of the data collection regarding change readiness in sport organizations, we are just preparing or putting together the last pieces of a survey, which will be sent out shortly, actually in a few days' time, for people working or representing sport organizations like sport clubs and sport federations, either as employees or as voluntary workforce, to respond. And it's quite a short survey with questions about change readiness, or how you perceive the change readiness in your specific organization. And we really encourage all of you who represent some kind of sport organization to respond to this survey and help us circulate it. And I guess it will be sent out through the change, to the change network, and hopefully also to the ENGSO network, etc. Will probably be published in LinkedIn. And all of you now participating in this session, I really would like to ask you to help us to circulate and spread this survey. So that's the next step, actually, to investigate the change readiness. And I think it will touch upon quite a lot of things that Antonio also mentioned in his presentation here. So that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karin, for the anticipation on the next steps. And if there are no more questions, I remind you all that the recording will be available on Change website. We will publish it on social media as well. We will send you the slides with a small survey for getting us some feedbacks to help us improve in the future if there is the need to do that. And again, thank you so much for taking the possibility of promoting the survey. We're very happy about that. And in fact, I was about to say that thank you so much for your attendance, because now you're part of the change, let's say, network as well. So it would be great, actually, if you could support us in spreading the survey and to reach even more clubs than the one and organization than the ones that we already are in contact with. Also, last note, I was asked if we can send out some certificate of attendance to this webinar. Of course, it's possible. If you need it, please, in the email you will receive, there is an email contact you can you can use in order for you to ask us the certificate, and we will send it to you in a few days. So thanks again, and yeah, let's try to spread the change in the sport movement. And I don't know, have a nice evening, let's say. Thanks to you for participating.
Thank you.